Welcome back to Face the Nation. I'm John Dickerson. Joining us now from Chicago is Democratic strategist and CNN senior political commentator David Axelrod. David, you've been inside these campaigns and you know what it's like. Take us inside what happens when you're in a campaign and the numbers aren't looking good, which is the situation Hillary Clinton faces.
Yeah, this isn't theory. I remember 8 years ago, almost to the day, when everybody was reading last rites over the Obama campaign. We had blown our opportunity. We were way behind in national polls. You know, what happens is that every donor in America becomes an amateur political consultant and very generous with their advice. I remember during that period one of the donors in Chicago summoning Obama to a meeting, telling him that he must fire his leadership and replace it with people who were more familiar with Washington politics. And so, you know, it's a very uncomfortable place to be, but you have to keep your perspective in the midst of the storm and take the long view, make the adjustments you need to make, and not panic.
And not run off the rails. So what does Hillary Clinton have to do you think, at this moment?
Well, first of all, I think we ought to apply some perspective to this. She's still in a very strong position. If you know, Iowa and New Hampshire are challenging for her, but Iowa involves organization. If we hadn't started organizing Iowa in March of 2007, with all the momentum we had, I'm not sure we would have won the Iowa caucuses. She learned that lesson, and my understanding is they're doing a better job of organizing Iowa on the ground, and that's going to be meaningful in the winter. As you mentioned, as we've discussed, John, after Iowa and New Hampshire come a series of states with large minority populations where she has a decided advantage. So, you know, the situation isn't all that bleak for her, as these polls would suggest, but they're certainly an alarm, and they should be taken seriously. I think she needs to untether herself from the talking points, from the teleprompters, from the polling, get herself out of this straitjacket of inevitability, and really speak from the heart about why she wants to be president and what this campaign is all about. Authenticity is the coin of the realm in presidential politics, and she needs to show hers.
Explain authenticity a little bit, about because we hear that word all the time. Talk about the transaction that takes place with a voter and a candidate who they think is, quote unquote, authentic.
Well, I think that people want to know that the person they're voting for is comfortable in their own skin and is presenting themselves as they are, and is not filtering everything through a 7-second political kind of delay so that it comes out in absolutely calibrated language, which is the feeling you get from Mrs. Clinton from time to time. They want to know that you are who you seem to be. And I would argue that that authenticity is the leading indicator in presidential races. If you look at the last many presidential races, the more authentic candidate tends to win that election, at least in the general election. So it's very, very important.
When you hear about authenticity on the Democratic side, a lot of people mention Joe Biden. Do you think he's going to run?
You know, I think he is authentic. He's utterly authentic. He says what he means and he says what he feels. And I think we ought to listen to what he's been saying lately. I don't think he's playing a game when he says that he doesn't know if he has the emotional reserves to run a presidential race. And remember, he knows uniquely what it takes to run a presidential race. So I think that this is going to be a very hard thing for him to overcome. And that's what he's been telling us. So I take him at his word, and I think ultimately that may be the deciding factor and that he won't run.
Another candidate who gets the authenticity label is Bernie Sanders. He's also doing very well in the polls. Give us your sense of his future and what the obstacles and challenges are for him.
I think he's done a great job. I have to give him a great deal of credit. He's gone farther than anybody anticipated, and it is partly because he comes across as a guy who believes exactly what he's saying and is very passionate about it. But the tests get different, John, and they get harder as the race goes on. And one of those is, do you have the dimensionality to be president? And it's not just about making a speech, it's about how you relate to people. That's going to be a challenge for him. But the other challenge is the one I mentioned earlier. He doesn't really have a relationship with minority communities because of the state from which he comes. And you can see that in polling in states like South Carolina, Nevada, and elsewhere. He's going to need to develop that to become a competitive candidate down the line.
All right. David Axelrod, thanks so much for being with us.
Great to be with you.
And we turn now to our political panel. Peggy Noonan is a columnist for the Wall Street Journal and a CBS News contributor. John Heilemann is the co-managing editor of Bloomberg Politics. Gwen Eiffel is the co-anchor of the NewsHour on PBS, as well as the moderator and managing editor of Washington Week. And Peter Baker is the White House correspondent for the New York Times. Welcome to all of you. We've got a lot of numbers here. Let's start with the Democratic race. John, let me start with you. Hillary Clinton is behind. Bernie Sanders is ahead. Martin O'Malley doesn't really show up in the polls. He's at 5% in Iowa, but in New Hampshire and South Carolina, in our poll, he's not showing up. What is the situation for Hillary Clinton right now?
The situation is not great for Hillary Clinton right now. It's not just that. I mean, the numbers in your poll are now take us another step, the same trajectory, which is she has been losing altitude consistently now for the last 6 months in the two first states in the nomination contest. It's true what David Axelrod said. They are unique in the sense that they are almost all white in both states. And so Bernie Sanders has a kind of purchase in those states that he might not have in more demographically diverse states. But those are two really big, important states. And if you were the front runner, the inevitable front runner, and you're now losing ground every day in those states and seeing Bernie Sanders rise in those states, and you can see what's going on underneath those numbers, which is lack of enthusiasm, questions about her honesty and trustworthiness, those are all bad omens for her. It's not over by any means, but she is headed in the wrong direction.
When Hillary Clinton tried to reverse that direction this week by apologizing for having for having one email account, for not having two email accounts. There were some reports in the paper about efforts to increase authenticity, which a word we're all trying to figure out what that really means. How did she do on that front on reversing?
It must make her crazy to have David Axelrod be her defender because he's the one who helped to take her down in 2008. She's not doing particularly well on that front, but also we have to look beyond what we see in these first polls, especially with Joe Biden included. We all know from experience that you're always at your strongest before you get in the race. So he hasn't done a thing except anguish on national television, hugely sympathetic, but of course that takes away from her, especially with the questions. I thought it was interesting, however, in the poll that people say it's not the email controversy. That means it's something else, and that's what she's got to worry about.
Which might even be harder to fix, because you can turn over a server, you can say you're sorry, but if it's something else, that's hard to. Peggy, David Axelrod said Hillary Clinton needs to untether herself. How does a person untether themselves?
Well, I wasn't sure what he meant. Untether herself from what? From this sort of leaden, predictable, defensive persona in which she's very self-protective, or I wasn't sure if that was exactly it. Let me tell you what I think is most remarkable about what we're discussing here. Mrs. Clinton has been operating at the highest level of American politics for a quarter century now. And we're talking about her second presidential campaign or attempt to get a nomination, and we're still saying things like authenticity and you should show your warmth and humor. What an extraordinary thing that in a quarter century we still have to have that conversation. They were saying it 20 years ago. To me, this all just is starting to feel like 2008 again. The inevitable candidate starts to look evitable. And I think if Biden got in, I must tell you, I think within 2 or 3 days, he'd be up 20 points. I think he'd be such a serious contender.
I want to get to authenticity in a minute, but Peter, since you spend so much time thinking about White Houses, and these campaigns are supposed to tell us something about candidates and how they would handle these situations, it is familiar in a White House to have a huge firestorm and everybody kind of hunkers down. And so they have to adjust, but not adjust so much, and David Axelrod talked about this, adjust so much that they go haywire. What do we learn? What do we know about Hillary Clinton as a president from what we've learned of the way they've handled this?
Yeah, no, I think that's great. Look, the Clintons have been through this, as you say, so many times. Scandal, scandal recovery, setback of some sort, and they're good at it. They're the leading rebounders in American politics over the last 2 decades, so we should not, as John said, count her out by any stretch. If you look at the 2022 candidates or whatever who are running for president, the one person you'd still want to be if you were running is probably still Hillary Clinton. She has the best organization and money and position despite her problems.
And name recognition.
And name recognition. But the problems are important, and they do tell you something about how she would be as president. She's reluctant reluctant to admit mistakes. We talk about authenticity. I think the authentic Hillary Clinton is the one who said she wasn't sorry, because I don't think she was. She said, I did the right thing. I was allowed to do it. What's the problem? And she resists advice to say something otherwise.
I'll tell you how you don't project authenticity. You don't project it by having your campaign tell the world you're going to project authenticity, and then talk to reporters about how you decided that you were going to project authenticity on the basis of some focus groups you did. Yeah. That is the way you don't project authenticity. I'll tell you one way. Way you do. That did happen with Hillary Clinton this week. One way you do project authenticity is you go on Stephen Colbert, as Joe Biden did this week, and you give an interview like that comes across as, to everyone who watched it, as human, real. Gwen used the word anguished, but funny at points. That again, whether you like Joe Biden or not, you couldn't watch that interview and not say, that's the real deal. That's what Joe Biden is like. That's a human being I can relate to.
The one thing that struck me as being completely true about what he says is anyone you've ever covered who runs for president is 110% in it. Believes themselves to be more possible. It's more possible for them than anybody else you've ever seen. He didn't have 50% of that, at least not yet. And I don't know how he gets it between now and when he needs to be serious.
It's odd that well, it strikes me as a little bit odd that he continually talks about his struggle to get there and the reasons behind his struggle. It's well established, it's done. I have a feeling he should stop talking like that if there's any possibility that he's going to get in this thing, because Americans.
I think it's working for him, and I think it's working for. I don't think it's calculated, but I think it's been a huge part of the groundswell around that's happened, and with the vice president's inner circle, the amount of incoming from donors, from elected officials, from voters who are trying to get him to come in has ramped up exponentially over the course of the last 6 weeks. Every time he talks about stuff like this, it makes him seem like a more sympathetic character. I'll say.
Oh, I understand that, but when you keep saying I just can't get to, or I'm not sure I can get to 110%, and then 2 weeks later you announce you're at 110%, does it startle people?
Well, we talk about fire in the belly, and we talk about whether a candidate has low energy. It is a hard transition, right, from this to that. And the good thing for Vice President Biden's point of view is his support and the calls, run Joe run, allow him to make a decision on his own terms. Yes. For a long time, he was just kind of forgotten. Wait, he was the vice president? Right. No, I thought Hillary Clinton was the vice president. She was the heir apparent. Yep. Now, at least, if he decides to, and he was left aside, Uncle Joe, and he hated that. He wanted respect, didn't always feel like he got it. So if he decides to run or not run, it at least is on his own terms, because he can say, the party wanted me to run, even if I didn't.
I have I've been doing a ton of reporting on this week, and I have a story coming out tomorrow morning on BloombergPolitics.com that I believe will advance the conversation on this narrative considerably. But I will say this for now. I have said for 6 months that I did not necessarily, that I really thought, that I believed he would not run. I now think it's more likely than not that he will run. I think that he will get in later than people assume. And I think that he has more or less, the human aspects are still true. He still needs to get over that last hump in his heart and get there with his family. But I think on every other metric, I think he's basically decided.
Save that tape. Save that tape and run it next time John is back.
And do you know anything about the state of play with regard to, we have to get endorsements, we have to get money, we have to get registered in each state, all of that stuff, the infrastructure.
The first filing deadlines that are in the middle of November, and they're very acutely aware of when those deadlines are.
And a final quick point, they obviously also know what Gwen talked about, which is all this wonderful glowing stuff now will drop away once he starts to run. Does he have the energy for that?
Well, I think that's still the question. I think, again, I don't want to say, I think he is being honest when he says he's not, that in his heart he's not 100% there. But I think they believe what Peggy said, which is that when he gets in, if the things keep going the way that they're going right now, when he gets in, he will get a huge boost in a positive direction. That will eventually fade, but the boost will be, he'll get a big bump on the positive side going in when he first gets in. And of course, Hillary Clinton
will just sit back and let it happen and won't push back at all, I'm sure.
Oh my goodness. Right. Oh, that's going to be something to watch.
Unfortunately, we will all be here to watch it, but for now, we're going to have to stop for a moment, and we'll be right back with more from our panel. And we're back with more of our panel, which includes John Heilemann. I have not been that teased since the prom in 10th grade. John Heilemann. Peggy Noonan, let's switch to the Republicans. Donald Trump is on top. He's saying Ben Carson too nice. Ben Carson, nice guy, is number 2. What do you make of this?
And Ben Carson saying, don't forget, I've had a lot of experience in business. I've been on a lot of boards. I've been on compensation committees. That's interesting. Look, that Trump came from nowhere and established himself so strongly is a huge story. That Carson has come up and is number 2 now is a huge story. The disappearance of Jeb, that's a huge story. There's a lot of bubbling going on there. We'll see. I suppose Trump will now be saying Ben Carson has low energy, and Ben Carson will be saying, you got to focus on this fella's character. I think we may see some sparks in the debate on Wednesday night, as all these fellows have to go after each other. The first debate was all Trump, boom. The second debate is everybody else going boom.
I thought the horse race was really interesting, but almost more interesting was people's second choice. If you look at Trump's support is wide right now, but it's not very deep. When people ask whether he's their second choice, he's not. People ask if Ben Carson is their second choice, they say he is. Yeah. So Ben Carson is connecting in a way with people who might actually show up to vote in a way that the Trump voters, who are not voters as far as we can tell, they're first timers, they're drawn to the bombast. They're drawn to the culture of the aggrieved, which he is the face of. I'm not sure how lasting it is because of that second choice question.
And Ben Carson, in our interview, Peter Baker, I mean, he just does not want to. He appeared to say something that might have been critical of Donald Trump this week, and then backed away from it, and today wasn't ready to either.
He's literally the anti-Trump. I mean, you literally have a contest between nice and not nice, and not nice, by the way, is doing pretty well. American politics does reward that to some extent. It doesn't usually reward nice, and so it's interesting to see him at this position. Whether it lasts or not, I don't know. He has to kind of introduce himself in a way that people know Trump. They've known Trump for years, actually. He's such a well-established figure in American society and consciousness, and Ben Carson isn't. So this debate this week is a chance, I think, for him to take those numbers and really introduce himself in a real way to a lot of voters.
But he's so deliberative. He's so calm and deliberative, Carson, that I wonder if he can negotiate himself into being a more fiery character.
I don't think we're going to see calm or deliberate on the stage from this debate this week. You saw this week Bobby Jindal, Jeb Bush, Ben Carson, Carly Fiorina. For the first time, people are all going after Trump, and the sense of it didn't work to ignore him in Cleveland. I don't think anybody's going to ignore him in Simi Valley. I think it's going to be kind of a bloodbath.
But Donald Trump is not wrong when he says Rick Perry went after him, and now Rick Perry has left the race.
He's correct. He's
correct.
It
has not worked.
It has not worked so far. It'll be interesting to see if rather than in a scattershot way, what the dynamic will be. I'm not predicting a downfall of Donald Trump. I'm just saying I think there's going to be, on that stage, people now think we must do something about this. Ignoring him is not working either.
There are two things you do. You go after Trump or you go after his ideology. This is not a debate right now about ideology at all. So that leaves people basically one option.
Or even a lack of ideology, which we covered so much in Republican politics. Peggy, let me ask you this question. For so long, we've heard from Republicans who feel betrayed by their leaders because they were not true conservatives. Right. Now, as Anthony Salvato showed us, true conservative ain't that important. What's important is whatever Donald Trump has.
I found that very interesting in Anthony's work. What they said that was most important to them was business experience. That tells you that, as they used to say in 1992, maybe it's the economy, stupid. Maybe they're thinking economic stuff. It's clear that Trump's supporters are ideologically all over the place. They are not necessarily conservative. Trump's support is more interesting than that, but I have also argued that the base itself is roiling a bit and is expressing different things. A bunch of Trump supporters are for nationalized health care. That tells you something's going on the Republican base.
Don't count out the evangelicals, who might now are not necessarily thrilled with Trump. They don't know how to express it. They don't know what to do about it. Somebody put up a pro-immigration group put out an ad today in which you see Ronald Reagan talking about, we want to build walls, but walls with doors. This guy is not Reagan, they're trying to say. We haven't seen a real ad against Trump. We haven't seen money spent.
Right.
We haven't seen a real campaign yet. Right. So right now what we see is a run-up. And that's why all of these numbers are really interesting. Grain of salt.
And in Iowa, watch those Christian conservatives who really do like Ben Carson better than they like Donald Trump, and that is an advantage Carson has in that state.
Huge.
Yeah, Peter, George W. Bush was one of them. Donald Trump is not one of them.
Yeah, I think George W. Bush actually spoke the language in a way that people heard and understood. Donald Trump has been divorced. He used to be for abortion rights. I mean, he doesn't seem to be, it doesn't have that kind of background. Right now, it hasn't hurt him. And the question is whether somebody can make it hurt him, because they can really bring that home to people. And it's fascinating that people have adopted him despite that.
All right, Peter Baker, last word. Thanks, all of you. We'll be back in a moment with a look at authenticity in politics. Stay with us. This summer, we've been talking a lot about authenticity. According to polls, Donald Trump has it, Ben Carson has it, Senator Bernie Sanders has it, and then there's Joe Biden, who has his own category. He told Stephen Colbert this week that he can't commit to running for president because grief at the loss of his son, Beau, keeps ambushing him. Joe Biden's battle between losing it and getting up is messier than we've come to expect in politics, where authenticity is often an act. It's an effort to hold on to faith and find grace and make something out of suffering, a struggle other people have known, and which feels authentic because it has nothing to do with politics. Back in a moment. That's it for us today. If you want to read more about our CBS News Battleground Tracker, go to cbsnews.com. Until next week, for Face the Nation, I'm John Dickerson.